afternoon. Thank you, Noah. Welcome to what is a Technical Review Committee at TRC. I am Stephanie Verdile. I am a Principal Planner with the Office of Strategic Initiatives. And with me today is Matt Monahan. He is a Principal Planner with the Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission. So today's agenda will be an RSA review related to planning board regulations and their authority. What is a TRC's roles and responsibilities? What types of TRCs are there as far as review authority or as an advisory committee? And what I use when I say TRCs for today's presentation, it's all encompassing of different types of committees that are out there that are known by different names, whether it's a technical advisory committee, whether it's a design review committee, a site study committee. They're all encompassing. It's all kind of the same thing as what a TRC is. It's just a TRC is what we're going to function with today. And we're going to go through roles and responsibilities of the TRC, and then Matt is going to move along and talk about some municipal examples. So let's review the RSAs. We all know that first the municipality has to establish a planning board, and once a planning board is established, they have to adopt bylaws and a master plan, which are the two chapters that are required that we all know of a master plan are the vision section and a land use section. So once a planning board has been established, they adopt their bylaws and a master plan. The next enabling legislation is that they adopt a zoning ordinance. After they have adopted the zoning ordinance, they can have the authority to regulate subdivisions. And once they can regulate subdivisions, they can have the review authority to regulate site plans. So once all of those have been enacted and the planning board has all that power, they can delegate their power under 674-43-3 to review minor site plans to the technical review committee. So a TRC is a committee appointed or authorized by the legislative body of the municipality, or those planning board and the municipal officials make up the TRC, whether that's department heads, the town engineer, board or commission members, maybe conservation commission or historic district. There is a chair and a vice chair. So when you think about a TRC, generally speaking, it's another arm of the planning board. And at the time of the enactment of having a TRC, they will determine, the legislative body is the body that determines whether or not the TRC will have review authority or will be an advisory committee. But that's basically what the TRC establishment is. So I spoke a little, they can have review approval authority, or they can be an advisory committee. And that's part of their roles and responsibilities, is whether they're approval authority or whether they're advisory. They are an intricate part of the development review process because they provide technical assistance to the developers. And that's to ensure that the applicant has all of the correct regulations in place, and they are aware of what's expected with them for their site plan. It informs all the town departments of the development process and what types of projects are upcoming through the approval process, so that everyone is informed and can have a chance to participate, and they know what projects are coming up, which helps create communication between the planning board and the municipal departments. And that's, you know, kind of that everybody's cooperating, everybody knows what's going on in town, and it can provide valuable information for the applicant. So if the municipality adopts the provisions of RSA 674-43-3 when authorizing the planning board to have a minor site plan review authority to a technical committee, it is the planning board that creates the thresholds for what minor site plan review the TRC will have. So they're those types of site plans that a little bit more than a building permit, doesn't necessarily need to go to full-blown planning board. That is the role of a TRC with approval authority, to take those minor site plans off the planning board's plate, and the municipality still has review authority. And so the planning board creates those thresholds of what it should be for their review authority. The planning board also, because the TRC with approval authority is another arm of the planning board, they act like a planning board with the same function of rules of procedure, of applications, of checklists, of waivers. And so they also, the planning board creates those rules of procedure, and that's what the TRC would follow as far as reviewing applications. So if your TRC has the minor site plan review authority, it's the planning board's job, again, to determine what the threshold is, what types of the minor site plans a TRC would review. And you could have, as these are examples, something new construction to a commercial building or an addition for a commercial building. You know, where's that threshold? It's a little bit more than a building permit, but doesn't necessarily need full-blown planning board review. So the board, the community can decide what the threshold is. It's a new building, it's an addition to an existing, we'll say, we're going to say between 1,000 square feet and 5,000 square feet, you have to go to TRC for review approval. Change of use applications, I think, are one of the best things that the TRC's role can fulfill for approving plans for the developer, for the applicant. A change of use is a great way for a small business owner to be able to get that approval authority without having to go to a full-blown planning board review. If a bookshop is closing and I own a pizza place and I want to move into an existing building with existing infrastructure, sewer, water, parking, all of that, then going to a TRC is very helpful for a small business owner instead of going to a full-blown planning board. So that's one of my favorite things that I like about the TRC with the minor site plan review authority, is the small business owners for those change of use applications can get that town input, get their advice from the department heads, from the town engineer, and get their approval without having to do the time and expense of going to a full-blown planning board review. Another issue that TRCs can be good at is deciding what to do about, parking or parking spaces or paving new areas. Again, it's a little bit more than a building permit, but you don't have to go to full-blown planning board review. But if you're creeping into an area of X amount of square feet that a business wants to repave or expand their parking, then there should be some review to that. There should be some DPW involvement. There should be some approval conditions so that where snow storage is, can a fire truck turn around in there? So again, bigger than a building permit, not so big that necessarily has to go to the planning board. Major home business applications are another great thing for a TRC to have approval authority over. If I am a landscaper and I run my business out of my home, but I want to expand, then again, more than a building permit, not so much full-blown planning board application. The TRC can take care of that, helps that small business owner, streamlines the process, takes it off the planning board's plate. Another type of TRCs for temporary events. Matt's going to talk a little bit about this, but again, it's that idea that if a community that has seasonal events, that you can have those site plans reviewed annually with a TRC so that they don't have to go to a full-blown planning board review. And at any time in this TRC process, the applicant or the TRC member can request that the application move forward to a planning board. So as an example, say I'm a Dunkin' Donuts and I move into a space where a bookstore used to be. Okay, so, yes, that's a change of use into an existing building with existing facilities and infrastructure there. However, a Dunkin' Donuts is a lot more intensive use of site than a bookstore was. So the TRC or the applicant at any time can say, you know what, I think that you need to go to planning board for a full-blown review because of traffic or because of, making a left turn out of your business, whatever those things are. So there's still that flexibility. The planning board can still be involved in something. The TRC can still send things, up the chain to a planning board if it warrants it. So there's enough flexibility there for applications and for developers and for the municipality. So again, the TRC, they're with approval authority, that it alleviates the planning board from having to review the minor site plans. When you think about all the work that the planning board has to do, and next thing you know, you get 3 or 4 minor site plans in a month in addition to everything else that they're working on, it alleviates the planning board from having to review minor site plans, and the municipality still has approval authority over that and jurisdiction for enforcement for conditions of approval. Streamlines the development process for the applicant. And like I said, it makes it a little bit easier and faster for them to go to a TRC instead of having to go to a full-blown planning board. It saves the developer and the municipality time and money in the development process. And it also can take another item off of the planning board's plate by providing a conceptual consultation with applicants. So if you have a TRC as an advisory committee, again, many of the roles and responsibilities are the same as with a TRC with approval authority. They have the same makeup. It'll be department heads, the same municipal authorization for their establishment through the Board of Selectmen or City Council. They streamline the development process. They can also comment and review on subdivisions, which is a little bit different than approval authority TRCs. Unless that authority has been given to them in their establishment, but it's helpful for a TRC with an advisory committee. It helps that planning board out with some subdivision things. Again, police and fire are aware and road agent is aware of those kinds of things. It helps the developer and the planning board. It can save the municipality and the developer, again, time and money by getting themselves prepared. They know what's expected of them. They have heard from police and fire. They can tweak their plan. They can take all those comments into consideration. And when the chair or the planning staff of the TRC will report what they discussed at that meeting and then pass that information along to the planning board. So the TRC as an advisory committee still can be, in that middle ground and help the applicant and also help the planning board. So the planning board knows what was discussed at TRC and everyone knows what's expected of them. It really streamlines that review process. So overall benefits of a TRC, again, is fostering communication and cooperation with the municipal departments over projects. Everybody knows what's going on. Everyone has a seat at the table. It only enhances the development process for the municipality and the developer. It helps to inform those departments of large projects. There's no shock factor there. If a big project is coming through, they may have to go to more than one TRC meeting to catch up. Everybody knows. Another thing I find interesting is something that, that may be overlooked, but, having a TRC, it really can actually help you in your CIP or your budget process. Again, if something is going on or there's an expansion or phasing of a subdivision, then, the police, fire, municipal departments, they may be able to have that information at the front. It's going to help them with their CIP issues and with budget issues. Again, the conceptual review is very beneficial. It takes that off the planning board plate, and the applicant is getting the input and the feedback, saving them time from a formal plan, so they know what's expected of them. And there's a lot of flexibility in the application and the process with TRCs. It's not so, stringent as the planning board would be. There's flexibility on how they can, provide information and work with the applicant. So now Matt will, sorry about that. Matt's going to talk about setting up a TRC and some municipal examples. So take it away, Matt.
Okay, so we're just shifting the presentation here for a sec. So let's see why. Okay, come on, why is this? Hold on just a second here. I'm having a weird, I can't. What is going on here? Minimize, maybe. Okay, there we go. All right. So how do you do a TRC, right? I think the first thing is to think about why you're doing it, right? At the most basic level, it's open. You want to open early communication between the town and the applicant. And you want to make sure you're giving them as much feedback as early as possible, and provide clarity on what the town is looking for. And I think the key, so I'll write this fourth bullet here, information early. That's the key, right? I mean, any planning board application, it's literally a communication process. Their first plan set, their first, application, it's, hey, here's how I think I'm meeting your requirements. And then the town or the city will get back to them and with the review memo or some other form of official communication and say, no, you need to do this or change that or whatever, right? So it's kind of like a tennis match going back and forth between the iterations of the plan and the material submitted. If you can push that process back early, as early as possible, and include the department heads, and include feedback on checklist and things like that, what happens is the applicant is going to get you something that's much more complete. So you're not at the meeting saying, hey, where's your north arrow? Hey, oh, and this is kind of the advisory side of it, right? Where's all your this or that? You should have had a waiver for that. The sooner you let them know, more likely they are to get it to you, and you're going to have a more complete application. And that saves the planning board time, and that saves the applicant time and money. It saves the abutters time. So they're not coming to, 3 or 4 meetings. They may be just coming to 1 or 2. So with that in mind, there's several ways to do kind of the advisory TRC, right? You want to think about where it's going to occur in the submittal timeline, how much flexibility you want to have with scheduling that meeting or holding it. And then lastly, you can look at event-specific ones and things like that, right? So where in the timeline, right? You've got an application comes in and you've got a period of time that the board has to act on it, right? So what side of that submittal date should you hold it? And there's examples of both. Steph used to work in Pembroke and I work in Allenstown. So those are kind of 2 examples there where we're going to talk about that, right? And just to be aware of how the TRC process plays into the statutory requirements for, for processing an application and notice. Okay. The other thing is you should make sure you're including all the department heads. So that could be, you have your full list of who you're going to ask to participate. Obviously the big ones, highway/road agent, police, fire. But what about the assessor too? You may have a situation where it's current use, right? They probably want to be on the list. You could also make sure you've got the superintendent or somebody representing the school board area, just to make sure if it's residential, hey, what's the impact on the schools and things like that. So, and even the tax collector, you want to at least extend the invitation. And they may not want to come, right? I mean, in Allenstown, I've got a huge TRC list. And I think, for instance, superintendent and the chair of the school board came once last summer due to a large residential development that we had. They hadn't come before, and that's okay. They saw and they wanted to talk about, hey, what do you look, how many bedrooms are you going to have, because that translates to kids and they need to get their planning. And one thing to touch on too is Steph mentioned the touch on the CIP process. I think that is important too, because at the time we were just kind of coming off a CIP process, and the school board was thinking about future expansions and things like that. And that's kind of a way to put your finger in the air and see the wind, right, from the school board standpoint. What's going on with development and what are we seeing? You can include, so this is something we do in Allenstown, right? So those department heads that can't make it or don't feel they need to, just send a quick email. Hey, I don't have any comments, or the only thing I have, is we need to make sure that there's a a stop sign, like right from the police department, and that's all I got, or something like that. So you make it easy for them to participate in the process, so that they can weigh in, and they can do it in a way that's fruitful, but at the same time, it's not such an interruption to their day that it's something that it becomes a problem. This one here, the third party participant piece. So that's if you've got a circuit rider planner from your planning commission, the engineer, the attorney. There's a couple ways you can approach that. You can either say, okay, applicant, make sure in your escrow you include, one or all of these, or you can just say, hey, the town, it's, we're going to consider that a staff thing, and we cover the cost. So you can probably, I think more often than not, you're going to see it end up as a third party escrow. But you can consider that too. So how does it actually play out, right? So you got like a chair or somebody kind of leading the discussion there, and basically you just go around the room, department heads, fire, what do you have? Police, what do you have? And things like that, and that gets you your department head feedback. But it's also important too to make sure you're providing kind of the planning board side of it from their checklist, regs, and zoning perspective. And to make sure that you've kind of walked through that process too, so that when the applicant leaves, they know department heads are looking for this. I got to do these 3 waivers. I got to show this, that, and the other thing on the plans, and make sure I've submitted that AOT permit or whatever the issue is. So you want to make sure it's as robust as possible. Again, as much information as early as you can get it to them. So minutes or notes, and you want to make sure the planning board gets that if you're just going directly to that. The other thing is, you can also fold it right into the memo. So that's what I do in Allenstown. I kind of take abbreviated meeting notes, and I just paste it right in my review memo. So they have it, here's who was there, just like your standard meeting minutes. Here's what the discussion was. Here's what the points were. And I keep those TRC notes in every subsequent memo just to make sure that they can track the evolution of the application over time. Did we resolve issues or whatever the case may be? This one here, don't consider new materials after the plans are submitted. So wherever in the timeline you set up your TRC, before an application comes in or after, you want to make sure that you're kind of eliminating the last minute Larrys, as some people call them, right? Like, oh yeah, I submitted this, and then 2 days before the meeting, they're sending you an updated plan. No, the point is we want to get all that out at the TRC so that you're submitting something that's complete. So if you kind of make that this last one, we're going to touch on a little later, but this is all about additional Cs kind of outside that process, but you're going to need to make sure that the applicant's on board with that. And I've got some examples with that. So Allenstown model, I mentioned where in the timeline does it take place? This takes place after the plans come in. So the plans are officially submitted to the town. And then the second piece is so me and the chair, we just basically say, hey, when do we want to schedule? And we kind of have like a week, the first week after it comes in. And what we do is we try and do that to accommodate flexibility for the applicant and for the department heads. And we just basically do it as fast as we can within that first week. Our committee consists of department heads, me from the planning commission, the planning board chair, the town engineer and attorney if we need them. The departments can say, hey, I got nothing for you via email, or submit if it's like kind of minimal and they don't really need to go and talk to the applicant. They'll just kind of submit some comments and say, here are my comments. But the key is you want to make sure that comes in before the meeting if it's like a minimal one-off comment, so you can convey that to them at the TRC. The applicant does provide third-party escrow for that meeting. And then, we do kind of quote, shut the door after that. In my review memo after the TRC, I'll say materials need to be submitted by X date to be considered at that meeting. And so keeping in mind too, that this process takes place after the submittal, and also recognizing that the RSAs talk about your timeline, and that if it's mutually agreed upon, you can kind of extend that. So if they need more time, I just asked, they send me an email saying, hey, I need more time. Because in Allenstown, they meet twice a month. So, and they consider applications at both meetings. So what they do is the applicant needs more time. It's like, hey, bump me to that second meeting or whatever. And I get it in writing, and I get it, in the form of an email. I issue my first memo, and it goes to everybody, and then they'll make the revisions, and I issue my second memo. And this last one is, again, TRC is outside that formal process. So right now, the regs require one TRC after you submit your application, an advisory one. But we've had instances where we've held additional ones. Okay, Pembroke. So this is, when Steph was in Pembroke, this is kind of the way it played out, and it still does for the most part. So it also takes place after submittal. It's held on a regularly scheduled date and time. It's got kind of similar makeup. So department heads, planning board rep, engineer, and attorney. They do provide the third party escrow to cover that. Also, no material is submitted after the plans are revised, and you get the date for notice. So really, it's about between the noticing date and the date of the meeting. That's really the drop dead period where you should say no new material. And if the applicant needs more time, they can request to be scheduled later. The planner issues a review memo, and you can also do the other TRCs outside as well. Trichester, this one takes place before submittal. So, checklist item 1, when the board is actually, there, did you do your TRC before you submitted? Yes. Okay. No. Okay. Well, you got kind of an issue. Now, in this case, it's for major site plans and major subdivisions only. It's recommended for minor. So you can kind of see like a nuanced approach to when it's required and when it is not. And the reason for that, there's a few reasons. I mean, they just kind of set the process up, and they're trying to see, how it works. But for some of these minor ones, they're trying to see, do we really need that? If they need to do that. So what do they include? So department heads is similar cast. Planning board chair, planning commission rep, and then department heads and the engineer and attorney. Also, they provide the third party escrow. And in this case, I would do the review memo, just kind of like I do in Allenstown. Review memo 1, review memo 2, and then the window shuts. In Boscawen, they've got a different model where it's the TRC has the approval authority delegated for minor plans. It follows the typical planning board site plan approval process. And as Steph mentioned in the RSAs, this is what they do here in Boscawen. You've got the applicant, the TRC, or the abutters may request planning board review. An appeal would be made to the planning board. And if you look at the membership, it's essentially similar. You've got the planning director, the building inspector, and code enforcement officer. So you're getting similar representation at that TRC. So before I get to this one, so just to kind of summarize, you've got to think about when you want to have it, right? Either before submittal or after. You want to make sure you're getting as robust an amount of participation and information as you can, as early as you can for the applicant, so that they can make their changes. And then once kind of that ability for them to answer your comments, you want to really shut the door and say nothing between notice and the meeting, just to make sure that you don't have those last minute things. I mean, there's nothing worse than 4 days before a planning board meeting, the applicants change the plans and he's finally got his waiver request in and all that. You want to make sure it's done with adequate time so it can be noticed and actually reflect what the board's got on the table for the plans, and also make sure that people have time to digest it. The board, and the abutters, and anyone else who's looking at it. So this is the interesting piece here, right? The topic specific ones. So the first one we're going to talk about here is in Allenstown. Last summer, they had two large residential projects. One of them was like 125 units. No, wait, might have been 150 of like rental, like, you know, multifamily homes, housing. The other one was a senior, like an assisted living facility that was about 100 or 125 units. So very large. The first one, the multifamily one, it was kind of a redevelopment, and it was in a part of town that had, it's kind of dense. It has, you know, other things going on, other nearby abutters to consider, traffic issues, things like that. And the other site is a little more out of town, but this one had issues kind of regarding primarily, you know, stormwater and wetland concerns. As we all know, there's a lot of the good land in New Hampshire is kind of used up. We're now getting to a lot of the more difficult stuff to develop. So it's important to be able to make sure that you can design your site plan and do it in such a way that it's, you know, maximizing the opportunity, but at the same time, minimizing the impact. So those were kind of the issues we were wrestling with. So what we did in both cases, you know, the applicant calls up, he's like, hey, you know, I'm going to submit X project. What's the process? And I described to them, you submit, we hold the TRC, and then we go to the meeting. And I said to both of these applicants, I said, you know, you may want to actually do an additional TRC before you submit, to get some of that feedback early before you put pen to paper, and you know, put money down and get the process going. And both of them said, yeah, that's a great idea. So we held, I think on the multifamily one, I think we did, it was either 1 or 2 for that one, and then it was 1 or 2 on the other one as well. And we literally just ran a TRC before they submitted. Then they submitted their applications. They then did the required TRC, but they had a lot of the stuff done for that. And we teased out a lot of these issues early. Department heads were weighing in, and all that. And then let's see, the second project, this is interesting. So we were, so in both cases, they had, you know, pretty complete applications. They got into that first planning board meeting and, you know, got off the ground and got a lot of things going, and they identified the issues early and they had most of it done. The multifamily one had an issue with traffic and transportation. So we're in the planning board meeting, we're doing our thing, and you know, that is where we kind of bogged down. First, it's important to note that we're able to get to that issue, which was the meat of the development, because all the other issues were addressed by TRC to begin with, right? So did you do this study? Did you do that study? All that was off the table. They got most of the stuff done, and we spent like an hour at the first, you know, meeting, first planning board meeting, talking about those issues. So what the solution was is we said, why don't we have a transportation specific TRC meeting with the department heads, with the town's engineer, with the applicant's engineer, between the two meetings. And we did that, and it was well attended. You know, that TRC during the day, just on transportation and traffic, a lot of those issues were fleshed out. They came out with some solutions, and then we went back to that next planning board meeting, and we were pretty much, you know, where we needed to be. It wasn't obviously exactly resolved, but it got a bulk of the concerns about, you know, your typical stuff, traffic counts, sidewalks, you know, all those things came out at that TRC. And then we just kind of reported back to the planning board and said, here's what happened at this TRC. We walked through these issues, and here's what we've got. So we just kind of, again, with the transparency of making sure you share everything from that TRC with the board and the public, we did that as well. And, you know, the abutters and everybody else, like, yeah, that's, you did a pretty good job of getting through that. So the key for Allenstown is you can do additional ones ahead of time, but also, you know, a topic specific one while you're in the middle of the planning board process, that could be a tool too. So this one, this is interesting. And this is from Steph when she worked in Laconia, an event specific one. So looking at this motorcycle weekend. So they have a TRC that it's slightly different from regular, but they still have, you know, some of the similar things in place. And they run it year round where they just kind of, you know, so this weekend, it's this weekend. So, you know, right after that, they're going to jump right back in and start going through and thinking about those temporary permits again and all those other issues that come up every year. But this TRC just focuses on that one event, you know, and it's ongoing year round, which I think could be, just thinking about Loudon with the race, they could probably do that. For all I know, maybe Foxborough and Mass does the same thing with the Patriots. It'd be a good idea. And it helps organizations, municipalities organize and plan for these large outdoor events. And it just kind of takes that off the planning board. So they're just down in the decision points and the discretionary aspects of things. Okay. So some final thoughts. The TRC is really designed to ensure that the information is provided to the applicant early in the process so they can make their changes, make their edits, make their revisions, make sure they're showing the catch basins as in the culverts as, you know, public work wants them, that they're considering the waiver for the back, you know, 90 acres on their 100-acre parcel where they're just subdividing off the front, and they know they got to put the waiver request in for the topo and the survey on the back 90. That they're submitting the appropriate studies or whatever they need to be. And keep in mind that there's not just one way to use the TRC. It's a flexible process that you can look at and make sure whether it's the one where they're approving the minor site plans, to the advisory one, to the event specific one, and just kind of use them as really a meeting of the minds of everybody that's got to weigh in on this thing, on this application, so that the applicant is getting the information they need and we're not, you know, haggling about north arrows at the meetings or whatever the case may be. And it's all about better clarity for all involved, so that when we are at the meetings, we're down to the, you know, the real nuts and bolts of where the board has to put their discretion, right? Is this waiver justified or not? Do we need to consider, you know, like the big decisions that boards always get to and makes up the bulk of what they do at these meetings. And think about too, if you have a TRC after submittal, you've got to be aware of your timelines a little more than if you have it ahead of time. And if there is a need to extend a little longer, make sure that the applicant is, you know, agreeing to that, and that, you know, they do so in writing. And again, flexibility, it benefits everybody, right? Just to make sure that you're using it to the best use possible. And it really, at the end of the day, it helps the applicant, but it also helps the planning board with their workload, whether it's the TRC is approving the minor site plans, or if it's advisory, just making sure everything's okay when it comes through the door. And let's see. And I think kind of with that, we're at 12:40, and I think we can probably jump into some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Let's get our
so thank you.
Here.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. So yeah, we're going to begin the Q&A session now. If online, you can type your question in the chat box. I don't know if you can see my pointer on where that should be on the bar on the bottom of your screen. I'm also going to go ahead and unmute everybody, since I don't believe that people on the phone can talk without me unmuting. So, and if you'd like to ask a question verbally, you can use the hand raising function to put your hand up to ask a question verbally as well. So just let me unmute everybody. Hold on one second. Great. So everybody should have the ability to unmute themselves now when they raise their hand, and folks on the phone should be able to ask questions now. So, and while we're doing that, I'm just going to put our contact information up. So I think there's a question here. Yeah, we have a couple questions that have come in. Great. First question is from Michael Aaron. Can the TRC take public input, or is that just for public hearings at the planning board?
I would think if you have the TRC that's doing the approval process, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't see why they could not. It's all, you know, public meetings and the like. But I mean, typically the TRC, yeah, I don't, Steph, did you ever see in Pembroke any members of the public come to any of
Well,
them?
sometimes they did, but one of the things where it's just, you know, slight little difference is that in my experience, if your TRC has review approval authority, then it's a little bit more, you know, it's a little bit more official. So
Yeah.
abutters most likely would be noticed, but yes, I mean, even if it's not etched in stone, you know, there's agendas that need to be posted. You know, if they have approval authority, like I said, they're a little arm on the planning board, so they're a little bit more held to normal, you know, review and approval public hearing processes. So, so yes, if it's with review authority, then you know, most of the time TRCs, which is a little bit different, is that they're held during the day. So it may be difficult for people to come, but you know, since they're a part of the planning board and with review authority, even as an advisory committee, it's the right thing to do. It's the transparent thing to do.
Yeah.
To allow people to speak. If somebody sends a letter because they can't attend because it's during the day, somebody should be reading that into the record. They really function like a little mini planning board. So I would say, yeah, if abutters and just general public can, you know, come to speak or listen, they should definitely be allowed to speak and know what's going on.
Great. So questions are coming in fast now. Next question from Tara Kessler. Is it possible for the TRC to review and act on subdivisions such as BLAs, which the statutes clearly state the planning board is the deciding authority?
I would say in my non-legal mind, of course, double check with your town attorney, but yes. But that would depend on how they set it up at the beginning. You know, you have to have the minor site plan review shall do boundary line adjustments or, you know, on lot on mergers, site plans. Double check with your town attorney as always before you advise or before the board takes any action. But I believe that you can set that up in the beginning because that's something else that you can take off the planning board plate. But it has to be in like the roles and responsibilities, the duties, the bylaws of the TRC to be able to do that, more than just a conceptual.
And just to kind of add too on the advisory TRC process, you could either set it up like in Chichester where it's just major applications, or like in Allenstown and Pembroke where everybody's got to do it. So you've got a lot line adjustment, and again, that's just the advisory one. They're not approving it. They're just kind of going through and doing the advisory review.
Great. All right. So next question is from Keith Charlton. Would it not fall under the right to know law?
Yes, they have to have it. They have to have agendas and minutes. Yes. TRCs.
So I don't know if there was more to that or that was it.
Yeah, well, a TRC as an advisory committee, they can just, have agendas. But when you get into the approval authority, again, the approval authority, it's public hearing, it's noticing. So the approval authority TRC is a little bit, they're a mini planning board, so they need to function like a planning board. The advisory committee is a little bit more loosey-goosey, but you should have an agenda up because it's a public meeting and, decisions can technically be made. So I hope that answered your question, Keith, for that.
Great. Next is a comment from Tara Kessler. RSA 674:43 parentheses 3 is written to make it seem like only municipal staff can serve. It sounds like there's more flexibility for who can serve on this committee. Stephanie or Matt, you want to comment on that?
Yes. In my experience, yes, you can have more flexibility with who sits on the committees. In Pembroke, we had the town administrator, even though the RSA doesn't necessarily say the town administrator, that committee, you can word that in the warrant that gets the approval, fire chief, the police chief, or deputy, DPW commissioner, sewer, water, school, or other department heads as they see fit. So that's been my experience. Matt, you've dabbled around
in
communities.
And I think, and in Chichester, I remember the Conservation Commission, right? Like making sure they have a seat at the table too. And you think about it too, right? Like a planning board, just a planning board meeting. You don't have to say, here's your board members, but in some towns, Conservation Commission will just show up on their own too for every single meeting. I remember years ago in a past life at another planning commission, we had the Conservation Commission chair just came to every meeting. And it was kind of funny when there was an applicant who told his board one thing and the planning board something else. And, just by being there, it's kind of a good thing. So you want to just be as inclusive as you can and get that feedback and, be flexible with it. But it's all about information early and, just kind of be as open as you can.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. Next question. From Jason Plordy, if a developer gathers information from the TRC and incorporates those items into the site plan, what happens if the planning board makes changes to the TRC's recommendations, i.e. other than a frustrated applicant in TRC?
So go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, yeah, sure, that's possible, but I will say more than 9 times out of 10, it's the TRC is saying, so on the department head side, you've got the public works side, for instance, saying we need to see a catch basin and culvert of this design and in this location. How often does a planning board in general say, no, we don't want to see that, we want to see something else? So I don't think the fact that it's in the TRC makes that more or less likely on the department head side of things. And then on the planning board checklist and those kinds of things, what you're really doing when it comes down to it. So from the planner standpoint, or even the planning board chair, if they're there, or whatever the case may be, you're literally saying, you're going through the checklist saying, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? So it's a checklist review process right there with the applicant. And if you get to an item where I always like to use that 100-acre lot with the 2-acre subdivision in the front. If you get to that piece and you're saying, oh, wow, I'm the planner and I'm like, I don't see you've surveyed the back, 98 acres and you didn't do the topo. It's a checklist item. So your options are you either put a waiver request in or you show it, and you just kind of put that in their hands. And then that he knows up front, this is an issue that you've got to address one way or the other. So the board will still have that discretion to, either approve that waiver or not, or the applicant can either do the work or not. He's being informed early. So he's really got nothing to complain about if he just ignored it, right, and didn't show it or didn't put in the waiver. And an example in Allenstown, I remember a couple years ago, there was an issue where I forget, I think it was a lot shape issue, and they had to, it was something along those lines. And the guy didn't show it. And I said, you either need to put the waiver request in or do it. And the board ended up denying his waiver request. So they still have their discretion. The TRC doesn't, the advisory TRC won't lock the board into anything any more than a planner's review memo normally, or you know, the department head comments would. So it's the same process. They're just getting that feedback much earlier. I hope.
And what I would throw into that too is when I was the planner in Pembroke. So your planning board, the TRC meetings were integrated right into the planning board meeting schedule. So if you applied for the July planning board meeting, and the planning board meeting is July 17th, then your TRC meeting is July, 10th. Okay. So you've submitted plans for the planning board. They're drawn, they're surveyed, You go to TRC. Everybody reviews and comments. If there's comments, I did not want a revised plan submitted. Okay, because you still have to go to the planning board. So TRC, the minutes, staff report, the applicant, the planning board, they know what was talked about at TRC. So then when the plan gets to the planning board is going to have changes, additions. You may want the conditions of approval to be, on the plan. So the point was, there's going to be other revisions in addition to the TRC. So don't revise plans as planners and, departments with planners, departments with, just staff and part-time planners. We don't want all that paperwork. It's confusing. Plus, it's already been noticed to the public as a plan one way. So save all your revisions for the end. The planning board knows what's going on through the staff report. The applicant knows, you make sure that everything is done at the end. There's no need for revision after revision. It's timely. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot to keep track of. You don't have to do it. Get through TRC, get through the planning board. The planning board may want you to put conditions of approval. They may want the waivers on there, on the final plan. So do all your revisions then.
Great. I'm trying to see that there are no more questions in the chat. So if anybody else has a question or wants to raise their hand or is on the phone and has a question, now would be the time to unmute yourself and ask.
If Keith is still on, I hope that answered your question.
I'm sorry, Keith did say that did answer.
Okay, yeah,
about right.
I hope that we have, feel free to follow up for anybody that asked a question if we didn't, make it clear. It's your questions answered.
Yeah, and I just want to throw one more thing on that is, from the checklist review side of the TRC, it's really looking at kind of the yes or no stuff, and it's not really getting into the discretionary stuff that the planning board is going to do, and offering an opinion on, oh yeah, you don't have to do this or that, or it's like literally that yes or no stuff. Did you address this checklist item in one way or another? I think is probably the best way to think about it.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt and Stephanie. This was great.
Thank you for everyone who attended and your questions, and always available for follow-up if you think of something, after the session. And we're always here to have any kind of questions answered.
Right.
Yeah,
yep,
thanks everyone.
Yep. And both Stephanie and Matt's contact information is up here. If, like they said, if you want, reach out to them after this webinar. The slides are available already on the Planning and Zoning website at the URL shown on your screen. The recording will hopefully be up, posted on YouTube with a link on the Planning and Zoning training page by the end of the day tomorrow. We'll also email that out. And please also, if you have time, check out the anonymous feedback survey link on the planning and zoning training webpage. We'd love any feedback you have to offer so that we can improve future webinars. So again, thank you very much for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.